Why was she listening to her own obituary? Static cracked through the battered radio, the voice on the other end calm, detached, final. Operative down, mission compromised, presumed KIA, age 29, dark hair, no life signs at coordinates. Dalton lay pressed into the rocks, her skin sticky with blood, dirt clogging her lashes. She heard the words describing her death while her chest still fought to rise and fall. And somewhere beyond the ridge, enemy fighters cheered, convinced the American infiltrator was finally gone. But they were wrong. Her command believed it too, believed the hillside ambush and the 30-foot plunge into a ravine had ended her. They thought the mission died with her. What they didn't realize was that this wasn't the first time it had been left with nothing but blood, grit, and silence. She had endured worse. And now, with the world convinced she was dead, the last restraint was gone. No leash, no oversight, no orders to minimize casualties. For weeks she had stalked them, recording, documenting, waiting for the right moment to signal. She had been told this cell was planning a single strike, but the truth was darker. They weren't planning one attack. They were stitching together a web, a network across the region, bound for something catastrophic, and they had seen her long before her command realized. The ambush wasn't luck, it was a hunt. She could still feel the vibration of that first sniper round. The way the air split beside her skull, the rock behind her exploding into dust. Instinct had carried her then, HK 416 raised, legs pounding, lungs burning. She remembered the panic flashing across her mind. They know my roots. They've studied me. What followed was 2 hours of fire and movement, the kind of test SEAL training drills into bone. Sound discipline, terrain exploitation. Kill, move, survive. 20 fighters against 1 woman, and yet she pressed forward because stopping meant never leaving that valley alive. But even in motion she had felt it, the creeping weight in her chest, the quiet question, what if this is where it ends? Her radio flared then, a call from Overwatch, calm words that sealed her in. Extraction delayed, hostile air activity, hold position. Hold position. Outnumbered 20-1, pinned down, her magazines already half spent. The nightmare of every special operator had closed around her. Enemies pressing from one side, allies too far, or too paralyzed by orders on the other. And for one moment had hesitated. The manual said wait, hide, stay alive until help came. But manuals had never met reality. Her jaw clenched as she weighed it. The targets she'd tracked weren't plotting a single bombing or raid. They were orchestrating something far bigger. If she waited, if she obeyed the voice in her ear, thousands of civilians would never see another sunrise. Her voice came steady into the radio. Mission parameters have changed. Request permission to complete objectives before extraction. The reply was ice. Negative, survival and extraction, intelligence secondary. That was the moment, the line she could never uncross. She stared down at the compound, the command center, the barracks, the heart of their plans. She looked at her rifle, at the darkness creeping across the valley, at the paths that could carry her in unseen. And then she lied. Overwatch, I'm switching to backup comms. Stand by for a check. She never switched back. Alone, bloodied, declared dead by her own command, Dalton chose to finish what no one else would. Hours later, in the deepest pocket of night, she crouched against the wire fence surrounding the compound. Razor spirals glittered faintly under starlight. Towers scanned the grounds. Sentries moved in overlapping arcs, too professional, too tight. But no system was perfect. She had studied them for weeks, and she had patience. The guard in the east tower turned his head just as he always did. 45 seconds of blind ground. That was all she needed. Her breath slowed. Her blade slid free, and in the silence she crossed. 1 sentry gone. No alarm, no echo, just absence. Inside, shadows became her camouflage. Weeks of observation gave her rhythm. When one guard paused to light a cigarette, when another always lingered a beat too long in his sweep. She moved in those gaps, a ghost feeding on their patterns. But inside the command center, the truth hit her harder than any rifle round. Maps, radios, schedules, dozens of targets across 3 continents, airports, schools, shopping malls, timetables arranged like arteries pumping into a single monstrous heart. This wasn't one attack. It was slaughter scaled beyond anything she had imagined. Her pulse hammered as she raised her camera, capturing everything, evidence enough to unravel the network. But the decision came fast and brutal. Intelligence alone wasn't enough. If she only carried proof out, the machine would still breathe. So she made another choice. Charges in the comms hub, in the armory, in the vehicle depot. Her hands worked fast, silent, clinical. She set timers, slipped into the shadows, waited. When the alarms finally screamed, when they realized a phantom had slipped inside their walls, she was already in position. Rifle braced, eyes steady. The first leader fell, then the next. The compound fractured under fire and flame, her explosives tearing out its lungs. Yet every shot carried weight. Every press of the trigger came with the voice in her head. How many more before they end me? By the 15th body, they closed the net. 25 men sweeping corridors, cutting exits, boxing her in. Ammunition thin, blood soaking through her sleeve, she fought on borrowed time. She sent the files in bursts, her last beacon transmissions carrying fragments of maps, rosters, lists, proof she might not live to explain. Then she hit the detonator. The night split open. Fire climbed into the sky, choking smoke smothering the valley. Screams rose, then vanished under collapse. And still through the chaos, one rifle found her. The sniper's round punched through her shoulder, spun her, tore her weapon away. Another burned into her leg, dropping her into a drainage ditch. She clawed forward with bare hands, dragging herself toward the wire. 10 meters. 8. Each crawl felt like a lifetime. Behind her, the compound burned. Ahead, only more rock, more darkness. Her body betrayed her, blood seeping faster than willpower could push back. The last thing she sent into the night was her confession. Mission complete. Intelligence transmitted. Tell my family I finished. Then the sniper fired again. Dirt exploded near her head. She kept crawling, inch by inch, until her hands found wire, until she cut through, tearing skin with steel. And then silence. The compound fell behind her, consumed by fire. The night carried only her ragged breath, her broken body sliding into the jagged terrain. Hours later, dawn brushed the horizon. Helicopters thundered in the distance. Maybe hers, maybe theirs, she would never know. Her radio broken, her beacon fatting, her body collapsing, she sank into the earth as the machines passed overhead. At 6:47, her beacon went dark, and Naval Special Warfare Command filed the final line. Dalton, KIA, mission incomplete. But they were wrong. In the silence of a mountain ravine, was still alive. And for the first time in her career, she felt free. Why hadn't the helicopters stopped? The question tore at her as dawn light stretched across the mountains. She had heard them, felt the vibration ripple through the stones, a promise of rescue, but they had flown past, rotors beating the air, never slowing, never searching. Because to them, she no longer existed. Her beacon was silent now, batteries drained, her radio shattered. To Naval Special Warfare Command, Staff Sergeant Dalton was already buried. She pulled herself deeper into the ravine, every motion scraping bone against earth. Her shoulder burned where the round had ripped through, her leg throbbed with every attempt to move. She should have bled out hours ago, should have surrendered to the silence, but surrender had never been her language. Still, even iron has limits. When she finally collapsed, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, a body folding into dirt, a mind slipping into half-light. When she woke again, time had moved on. Hours, a day, she couldn't tell. The pain in her leg had gone numb, which frightened her more than the bleeding had. She found shelter in a cave, dragging herself across stones that chewed at her skin. Darkness swallowed her, but inside that dark there was space to breathe. She pressed her back to the rock and let her mind catch up. Dead. They all think I'm dead. The thought echoed. It should have broken her, should have left her stranded in grief and rage. Instead, it whispered something else. If I'm dead, then I'm free. For 3 days, she clung to survival. She rationed what little she had left, treated wounds with nothing but grit and a survival kit that felt insultingly small for a war this large. She kept her rifle close, though it was empty. The weapon was a symbol now of what she still was, of what she refused to let go of. She listened too. The night carried voices if you knew how to hear them, faint chatter on open channels, distant shouting carried on wind, enemy fighters combing the ruins of the compound trying to rebuild. They believed she was gone, and that belief would kill them. By the 4th day she could stand, barely. Pain shadowed every movement, but pain wasn't new. Pain was a companion. She leaned into it, let it sharpen her rather than dull her, and with her body beaten but not broken, she began to stalk again. She found them 5 kilometers from the ruins, a temporary command post, sloppy compared to the compound but still guarded. Fighters clustered around radios, voices rising in urgent tones, rebuilding, reconnecting, refusing to let their shattered network die. Lay in the scrub brush, watching through cracked binoculars. Faces, patterns, weapons. They had no idea she existed anymore, and in that ignorance they revealed everything. It was the first time she let herself smile. For 2 days she mapped them, every guard shift, every careless smoke break, every opening door, every glance at a clock. Surveillance was patience, and patience was her blade. But the decision ahead gnawed at her. Logic whispered, wait for extraction, heal, survive, you've done enough. Her heart whispered something harsher. If you stop now, all those maps you saw, all those schools, airports, families, they die. She thought of her mother, the woman who had taught her strength wasn't in words but in action. She thought of the teammates who had believed her already gone. She thought of the civilians who would never know her name but whose lives hung in the balance. And she knew rest wasn't an option. The 8th day after her declared death moved. She came at the post like a shadow, not with rage, not with wildness, but with focus honed to a needle point. Every movement deliberate, every step planned. She carried weapons scavenged from the ruins, heavier than she liked but serviceable. The first guard didn't even hear her. A choke, a blade, silence. The second never had time to reach for his rifle. She slipped through the facility, room to room, the way water slips into cracks. It wasn't anger that drove her. It was something colder, a brutal clarity. Each person inside played a role, each one planning to spill innocent blood, and in her mind, sparing them was cruelty to strangers who would never see them coming. When she reached the command center, she heard them before she saw them. The cadence of planning, the cruel confidence of men who believed their mission still lived. A video call filled the room. Multiple leaders, scattered across borders, speaking of timetables and targets. She stepped into that doorway and let her weapon speak. The men around the table fell before they could scream, and the camera stayed live. On screens across continents, enemy leaders watched as their colleagues died, watched as the American they thought buried cut their command out from the root. Didn't flinch. She raised her weapon again, letting the silence stretch. Then, steady and cold, she delivered a message they would never forget. This is what happens to those who target the innocent. Your network is exposed, your operations finished, and your people will be eliminated. She severed their comms and tore the racks apart. Then she fought her way out, not as prey this time, but as the storm they had unleashed on themselves. For the next 4 days she hunted, methodical, relentless. She erased safe houses, burned caches, cut every line they tried to restitch. Her official death gave her a power she had never known before. No leash, no hesitation, no need to hide in the gray of politics. She became something else in those days. Not soldier, not survivor, a ghost. And ghosts don't rest. By week's end, a network that analysts had warned would take months of coalition effort to dismantle was gone. Erased by one woman the world had already buried. She knew command would never believe it until she told them herself. So, 2 weeks after the world declared her dead, she keyed her emergency beacon again. The reply came slow, shaken. Nightfall 7, we're showing your signal, but our records, they indicate KIA. Please confirm identity. Her voice was ragged but steady. Overwatch Nightfall 7. Mission objectives complete. Request extraction. Silence, then incredulous. Confirm you're alive. Affirmative, Overwatch. Very much alive. Mission complete. Ready to come home. Hours later, they found her sitting calmly beside a cache of stolen weapons and files, the valley smoke still lingering behind her. The extraction leader stared, caught between disbelief and awe. Dalton, our records show you were dead 2 weeks ago. The entire network in this region gone. Want to explain? She rose slowly, shoulders squared despite her wounds, and for the first time in weeks she let herself smile. They left me for dead, so I returned the favor. What do you say to someone you buried 2 weeks ago? The silence in the extraction chopper was louder than the rotor blades. Men who had fought their own wars sat around her, staring but not speaking, trying to reconcile the impossible. Dalton was supposed to be a ghost, a folded flag, a name etched in some quiet memorial. Yet here she sat, dirt-caked and bloodied, calm as though she had only returned from a routine patrol. She didn't speak either. There were no words that could capture the weight of what she had done, or the distance she had traveled to still be breathing. So she sat in silence, watching the mountains shrink below, feeling both the relief of leaving and the strange ache of unfinished business pulling her back. The ache followed her into the debrief room. For 3 days they asked her questions. Senior officers she had never seen before. Men and women with stars on their collars, others with names scrubbed from records. They dissected everything. Her decision to sever comms, her infiltration, her solo dismantling of an entire network. They played back her beacon bursts, the final words she had sent, words they had taken as her last. And over, the question came back in different voices, different forms. Why didn't you stop? Stared at them, hearing again the maps in the compound, the plans, the timetables, the lives balanced on the edge of those pages. She thought of what it meant to obey orders and what it meant to save lives. Finally she answered, "Ma'am, the mission wasn't finished. Being declared dead only gave me the freedom to do what needed to be done." The room went still. Admiral Hart leaned forward, eyes sharp as steel. "Dalton, what you did in 2 weeks alone would normally take months of coalition effort. You dismantled a network with captured gear, wounded without support. That's not just survival, that's something else." Didn't argue, she didn't embellish, she simply nodded. She had seen what needed to be done and she had done it, nothing more, nothing less. But her actions carried weight far beyond that room. Word rippled quietly through channels never meant to meet. Intelligence analysts tried to explain the erasure of a network without formal operations. Politicians whispered of a ghost soldier no one could admit existed. And inside the shadows of command, conversations began about what her story meant not just for her, but for the future of warfare. 3 weeks later, she found herself walking corridors she wasn't supposed to know existed. A facility off the maps, deep underground, where the air smelled of steel and secrets. There, she briefed officials whose faces weren't in any directory, men and women whose questions cut colder than any battlefield. One of them asked, "Dalton, the enemy's mistake was assuming you were gone. Can that be replicated?" She thought about it. About the mental toll, the isolation, the silence of being both dead and alive. about crawling through ravines with no promise of rescue, bleeding and broken, kept alive only by stubborn will and the refusal to accept failure. Her reply was slow, deliberate. Not everyone can survive being a ghost. It takes a certain profile. Someone who can operate alone, who can keep fighting when the world forgets them. It can't be taught to just anyone. General Laura Mitchell pressed further, but it can be taught to some. His eyes narrowed. She understood now. They weren't just debriefing her. They were studying her, considering something new, something darker. And when Admiral Hart finally spoke, the room shifted. Dalton, what you've shown us is a different kind of warfare. Ghost missions, phantom operators. The enemy believes you're gone, so you move where no one expects. That might change everything. Sat in silence, her heart steady, her mind restless. She hadn't asked to be a symbol. She hadn't asked to be the blueprint for a new breed of soldiers. She had only wanted to finish a mission, to keep innocent blood off the ground. But history doesn't ask for permission. It only remembers what can't be forgotten. In the days that followed, proposals turned into plans. Files marked beyond top secret began to circulate. A new class of operations missions carried out by operatives officially dead, stripped from rosters, written off in silence. Ghosts sent to finish the impossible. And Dalton became the first instructor. She trained them not just to fight, but to disappear, to survive isolation, to navigate the emptiness between life and death, where no recognition waited, where no flag would cover their caskets, where the only reward was the shadow of a saved life. She told them what no manual ever had. You don't fight for medals or memory. You fight because someone has to. And when you're written off, when the world forgets you, that's when the enemy reveals their weakness. You are the silence they never expect. Some broke under the weight of it, others hardened. A few proved capable. And quietly the first ghost missions began. Networks collapsed without explanation. Threats vanished overnight. Files stayed sealed, operations unacknowledged. To the world, nothing happened. But in reality, shadows fought shadows, and this lesson proved true. Sometimes the deadliest warrior is the one already believed to be dead. Still, in the quiet of her own nights, she wrestled with the cost. She had lived when she should have died. She had taken lives without hesitation, without oversight. And though she told herself it was necessary, she couldn't escape the memory of faces, of eyes that widened in those last moments. She thought of her own obituary, still recorded in official logs. She thought of her mother, somewhere out there, mourning a daughter who no longer existed. And she asked herself a question that never left. When they declared me dead, did part of me stay buried? Because ghosts walk, yes, but they do not live. And Dalton was learning that surviving death was only the beginning of the war. How do you live when the world believes you're gone? The question followed her long after the debriefings ended, long after the classified doors closed. It followed her into the silence of nights where no name was called, no recognition offered, no acknowledgement that she even existed. Dalton had survived, but survival came with its own kind of death. Her mother still lit a candle for her every night, believing her daughter lay under foreign soil. Old teammates carried her memory in quiet toasts, speaking of her in past tense, lowering their eyes when her name surfaced. Somewhere, etched on a wall, her name stood among the fallen, and lived in the gap between truth and myth. The program took shape around her. They didn't call it by name in documents, not yet, but in whispered rooms, in closed-door sessions, it was already something more than an idea. Ghost missions. Phantom operatives. The theory she had embodied by accident was now being sculpted into doctrine. She became their first instructor, though she had never wanted the title. Her students arrived one by one, eyes sharp, jaws set, some curious, some reckless, some broken in ways that made them candidates for this strange kind of resurrection. Each bore the same question in silence: can I survive being erased? The training wasn't about tactics they already knew. Shooting, moving, surviving. They were experts before they stepped into her presence. What they needed was something no manual could teach. Isolation, silence, the weight of absence. She told them the truth. Weapons will fail, radios will die, extraction will vanish. All you will have is yourself and the will to keep fighting when no one knows you're still alive. Some nodded, others faltered. One broke down after a single night locked in the simulation chamber, a steel box with no sound, no light, no clocks, only the echo of your own heartbeat. Ghosts must live in silence. He could not. Didn't judge. She had learned in the mountains that not everyone could carry the weight of vanishing. Some need recognition to anchor them. Ghosts cannot afford that. And yet, as she trained them, as she watched the few who endured harden into something else, she felt a strange unease settle in her chest. She was making more of herself, more shadows, more people condemned to live in silence, stripped of names, families, lives. It was necessary, she believed that, but believing didn't ease the guilt. The first mission came fast, a test, an operator named Rains. He had been written off in a staged incident, a training accident logged in official files. Family told, funeral held. To the world he was gone. But to the enemy, he became invisible. They sent him after a safe house in a city already bleeding from years of attacks. Intelligence said the house was central to a new wave of bombings. He went in alone, carrying nothing but captured weapons and his own will. 3 days later, the house was ash, the network severed, the operatives inside erased. The official report claimed foreign had taken the house. Newspapers carried the story. Governments nodded. But in truth, it had been one man already dead. Rains returned gaunt, eyes hollow but alive. And when looked at him, she saw herself reflected, the same haunted silence, the same weight pressing down where metals might have been. It worked, the doctrine worked, and yet watching him she whispered to herself, at what cost? Because ghosts don't come home. They walk the earth unseen, forgotten by everyone except the enemy, and the enemy doesn't write tributes, they write fear. More missions followed. Names vanished from rosters. Families mourned soldiers still breathing. Threats disappeared overnight, networks collapsed with no explanation. And theory became reality. The enemy's greatest mistake was believing death ended the fight. But at night, alone in the quarters they gave her, she wrestled with something she couldn't train away. She remembered the faces. Not just the enemies she had killed, but the mothers who would never know the truth, the friends who still thought of her as gone. She thought of her own mother, still lighting that candle, still grieving a daughter who had never returned. And she asked herself again, who am I if I'm not even alive on paper? Ghosts walk, but they do not live. Her unease grew when she looked at her students. She saw in them not just soldiers but people. People with lives stripped away in service of a mission they could never speak of. Every time one returned from the shadows, alive but erased, she felt the weight grow heavier. Was she creating protectors, or was she creating phantoms too hollow to find their way back? Yet when the reports came in, another attack stopped, another network erased, another wave of civilians who would never know how close death had come. She told herself it was worth it. That silence was a small price for thousands of lives. But deep down, she knew silence was not small. Silence was endless. Silence was a grave that followed you while you breathed. And for Dalton, silence had already become home. One night, Admiral Hart came to her quarters. The woman who had believed in the program from the beginning, who had seen not as broken protocol but as proof of concept. Hart poured herself a drink, studied his tired face, and asked quietly, "Dalton, do you regret it?" Didn't answer immediately. She thought of the ravine, the sniper's bullet, the crawl through razor wire, the smoke rising behind her. She thought of the weight of finishing a mission after being declared gone. Finally she said, "Regret, no. Cost, yes. Every ghost pays it, some more than others." Hart nodded. "History will never know your name, Dalton, but it will be safer because of you. Looked into her glass, the liquid trembling with her unsteady hand. History doesn't matter, Admiral, but when I close my eyes at night, the faces do. For the first time, Hart's eyes softened. Maybe that's why it has to be you teaching them, because you still care. The words lingered, sharp and true. Didn't sleep that night. She sat awake in the dark, listening to the silence, wondering how long she could live in a world where she was already dead. What happens when you build an army of the dead? The question haunted as the program grew. What began as whispers became action, and action soon turned into something much larger than she had imagined. Files once scribbled in secrecy now carried stamped approvals at the highest levels. Operators were being buried on paper, their funerals staged, their families mourning while they slipped into the shadows. The world thought them gone. In truth, they had just begun. The first small missions had proven the theory. One man could cut down a cell while the enemy celebrated his death. One woman could erase a safe house while governments marked her as non-recoverable. It worked, too well. Now they were planning something bigger. Sat in the cold conference room, a map stretched across the table. Red pins marked a web across 3 countries, each one tied to a single network preparing simultaneous strikes. The kind of operation that, left unchecked, would ripple across borders and leave the world gasping. A dozen lives at risk in one place, hundreds in another, thousands if the network succeeded. The discussion circled, clinical and detached. Analysts rattled off targets, timelines, contingencies. Admirals weighed in, generals nodded. Then the room grew quiet, eyes turning to her. Dalton, Admiral Hart said, could a ghost team do this? The air stilled. Leaned forward, studying the map. The pins glowed like scars. She thought of her own crawl through the dirt, of blood drying on her hands, of the silence that comes when no one knows you exist anymore. She thought of what it took to not only survive death, but to wield it as cover. Finally she said, yes, but not without cost. A general cleared his throat. Every mission carries cost, casualties, collateral. She cut him off, her voice cold. Not that cost. I'm talking about the people you turn into ghosts. They don't come back. They can't. You ask them to erase themselves for the mission, and maybe they win, maybe they save lives. But when it's over, who do they become? The room shifted uncomfortably. Silence pressed in heavy. Hart met her eyes. Dalton, the mission comes first. You know that better than anyone. Wanted to argue, but she didn't, because she knew the truth. She had lived it. The plan moved forward. They chose 4 operators. Raines, the one who had already proven himself. 2 others hardened by years in the field. And a 4th, a woman named Vega, sharp-eyed, quiet, carrying the same haunted calm had once seen in the mirror. Each was declared dead in different corners of the world. A training accident, a helicopter crash, a roadside bomb, families wept, comrades mourned, coffins lowered with folded flags, and then in the shadows the team prepared. Watched them train, her chest a knot of conflict. They moved like predators, precise and silent. But between drills, when the noise faded, she saw it, the flicker of something hollow in their eyes. The knowledge that they no longer existed. That every smile from family, every laugh with friends was now memory, not possibility. She wanted to tell them the truth, that surviving the mission was only half the battle. That living afterward, when you no longer had a name, was harder than crawling through wire with bullets at your back. But she stayed silent, because ghosts don't give warnings. They only walk forward. The mission launched under the cover of a storm. 4 shadows slipped into 3 countries at once, each moving against a node of the network. Wasn't on the ground, but she felt every beat of it. Watching feeds that would never make official reports, hearing bursts of comms that would never be archived. One by one, the nodes went dark, safe houses burned, leaders silenced, weapons caches erased. By dawn, the network had fractured, its attack plans shredded before they could breathe. It worked again. But when the team returned, saw what the maps and numbers didn't show. Rain's eyes deeper than before, carrying silence like a wound. Vega, steady but brittle, her hands trembling when she thought no one watched. The others colder, efficient, detached. They were alive, but less human. Stood outside that debrief, the storm still raging against the windows, and asked herself a question she could never say aloud. Are we saving the world, or are we building something it won't survive? Because ghosts protected the innocent, but ghosts also haunted the living. That night she walked the corridors alone, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. She found herself in the observation room, staring at her own reflection in the glass. Dirt had been scrubbed from her skin. Wounds had healed into scars, but the eyes staring back weren't hers anymore. They were a ghost. She pressed her hand to the glass, whispering the truth no one else dared to. We're not soldiers anymore. We're shadows, and shadows don't get to live in the light. The next morning she trained them harder, not in weapons or tactics, they already had those, but in silence, in isolation, in carrying the weight of being forgotten, because if they were going to be phantoms, then she would make sure they could survive it. Still at night, when the halls were empty and the silence stretched too long, she wondered how long before the ghosts consumed her too. Why did they call her back? Had thought her days in the field were done. She had earned her scars, given her blood, sacrificed her name. She had been the test case, the first ghost. Now her role was to shape others, to make sure the ones who followed didn't crumble when the silence swallowed them. But then the knock came. A coded signal on her door, 2 guards in black uniforms. No words exchanged, only a folded order placed into her hand. She opened it, and her stomach tightened. The mission was hers again. 3 high-value generals, scattered across a borderless desert, coordinating operations too dangerous to leave intact. Analysts said they were ghosts themselves, men who had evaded every strike, every drone, every conventional raid. Always one step ahead. Always a move sharper than expected. And now the program wanted her. The original Phantom, the one who had proven the impossible. She stared at the paper for a long time, fingers trembling though her face stayed still. Why me? She already knew the answer. Because no one else could be trusted. Because if she failed, she was already dead in the eyes of the world. That night she sat alone in her quarters. The others were training, sweating, laughing nervously between drills. Human still, if only at the edges, she them. She had already lost that part of herself. She closed her eyes and her mind took her back to the ravine, the sniper's round, the crawl through blood and wire, the feeling of leaving her life behind 1 inch at a time. She whispered into the dark, once a ghost, always a ghost. The mission began with silence. No fanfare, no send-off, no promises of return. Only a black bird cutting low through night sky, dropping her miles from her target, alone again. The desert stretched wide, endless, cruel. Wind carried grit that stung her eyes and choked her throat. She moved through it with the patience of someone who no longer measured time the way the living do. Days and nights blurred, water rationed to drops, footsteps buried in sand. The first general hid inside a fortress disguised as a village. To outsiders, it looked like clay huts and market stalls. But saw the truth, antennas masked as laundry lines, couriers carrying messages in bags of grain, fighters blending with families who didn't know they were living inside a war room. It wasn't a place for bombs, too many innocents. That was why they had sent her. She waited until dusk, when shadows stretched long and human vigilance cracked. She slipped in with the crowd, her face hidden, her body moving like someone meant to belong. Hours spent observing told her which hut to approach, which door concealed not a home but a command center. Inside she saw him, the general, a man who thought himself untouchable. Papers spread across a table, voices low but confident, plans that would kill hundreds, thousands. She breathed once steady and made her choice. The shot was silent. The man fell before his guards even realized death had entered the room. In the chaos, she vanished. Not into the desert yet, not into the night, but deeper into the village, becoming just another shadow slipping between walls. By dawn, she was gone. The fortress had become a hive of confusion, fighters shouting, villagers terrified, children crying. But the leader was gone and the network cracked. 2 more to go. The second general proved harder. He moved constantly, never resting in the same place. A convoy one night, a hidden bunker the next. Tracked him for 4 days, patience grinding against exhaustion. Each time she drew close, he shifted. Each time she set her plan, he vanished. Finally, she caught him at a river crossing, his men careless in their confidence. They thought the desert protected him. They didn't think death could swim. Proved them wrong. She hit fast, silent, precise. One by one, guards fell to her blade before they could raise alarms. When the general turned, her rifle was already leveled. His eyes widened not at the weapon but at her face. He whispered something in his tongue, a word that needed no translation. Ghost. The round ended him before the echo faded. 2 gone, 1 remained. The last was the hardest. The third general had seen what had happened to the others. He vanished into the mountains, wrapped himself in caves and guards and silence, but knew those mountains. Knew the way sound carried, the way stone betrayed movement, the way fear made men careless. For 3 nights she hunted him. Each step was pain. Her body screamed with old wounds, her mind pressed by memories. She thought of her students back in training, of the candles her mother still lit, of the silence that had become her life. She asked herself if she could still finish, if she still had the will to be what they made her. On the 4th night she found him. Deep inside a cavern, torches flickering, his men spread wide but unfocused. They thought the darkness would protect them. They didn't realize the darkness belonged to her. She moved like breath, like absence. Guards fell before they could scream, and when she finally stood over him, the last general trembled. He had commanded hundreds, killed without thought, orchestrated chaos. But staring at her, he saw something worse than justice. He saw inevitability. Her rifle didn't shake, but her heart did. Because in that moment, as she looked at him, she saw herself. Not in his violence, but in his emptiness. A life consumed by mission, by war, by shadows. And she asked herself, when this is over, who will I be? She pulled the trigger anyway. The cavern fell silent, 3 generals, 3 deaths, a network gutted. The mission was over. But as she climbed back into the mountains, leaving only smoke and silence behind, she felt it heavier than ever. She wasn't just killing men. She was killing herself piece by piece, with every step deeper into the shadows. By the time the black bird came again to pull her from the desert, she wasn't sure if she was still Dalton, or if she was only the ghost they had made her. What happens when shadows begin to question themselves? Saw it first in their eyes. The students she had trained, the soldiers declared dead, the phantoms who returned from missions no one would ever know about. They came back with intelligence, with results, with enemies erased. But they also came back with something else, a hollowness spreading, a silence that wasn't discipline anymore. It was despair. Rains, once her strongest, now sat for hours in the barracks staring at nothing, his weapon cleaned 3 times over though it hadn't been fired in days. Vega, the quiet-eyed woman, had stopped eating with the others. She trained alone, slept alone, carried herself like she was already buried. Knew the signs, she had lived them, she was still living them. But now it wasn't just one ghost carrying the burden, it was many. The program's leaders, of course, saw only the victories. Safe houses gone, networks collapsed, attacks erased before they could breathe. On paper it was flawless. Beyond flawless, it was revolutionary. They whispered of expanding it, more ghosts, global reach, a permanent core of the dead. One night, in a windowless room, Admiral Hart laid the numbers in front of her. Dalton, Hart said, her voice even. Do you realize what you've started? Do you realize how many lives this has saved? Studied the files. Pages of plans destroyed, lists of targets neutralized, plots suffocated before they could ignite. Each file a quiet miracle. And yet, she closed the folder. I realize what it costs. Hart leaned in. Every war costs, but this is victory without acknowledgement, success without headlines. You've given us a weapon no one else has. Wanted to argue, to tell her that weapons weren't without consequence, that silence could drown even the strongest. But she said nothing, because Hart wasn't wrong. That night, walking the sterile halls, she heard footsteps behind her. Vega. Ma'am, Vega said quietly, how do you live with it? The question struck harder than any bullet. Turned, searching the young woman's face, seeing the cracks beginning to form. You don't, answered finally. Her voice was steady, but her chest tightened with the truth of it. You carry it, that's all. Vega's eyes dropped. Sometimes I think maybe I'm not carrying it, maybe it's carrying me. Reached for words, something to hold Vega steady, something to offer hope, but nothing came, because she felt the same. The next mission came quickly, too quickly. A cluster of bomb makers operating in the shadows of a city already choking with fear. Intelligence marked them as critical, eliminate them, and you save hundreds, maybe thousands. Ghosts were sent in. Rains, Vega, 2 more. Watch from the control room, her hands gripping the edge of the console as faint signals flickered across the screens. She had walked this road. She knew what they felt. The silence. The weight of moving through streets where no backup waited, no name existed. The mission succeeded. The bomb makers were gone, but the team didn't return the same. One of them never returned at all. Officially, he had been dead for months already. Unofficially, he was now truly gone. The others came back, eyes darker, shoulders heavier. Vega avoided gaze. Rain said nothing at all. Stood in the aftermath, the reports already stamped with success, and felt the first true fracture in the foundation she had built. Because ghosts don't break in battle, they break in silence. That night she couldn't sleep. She walked the training grounds under the dim floodlights, the desert air sharp and cold. She thought of the network she had erased, of the 3 generals, of the countless faces that would never know her name. And she asked herself, did I create a shield, or did I create a curse? The question deepened when a man approached her in the shadows, not one of hers, someone older, unfamiliar, his voice low, words chosen carefully. You've changed the game, Dalton, but games have rules, and when you bend them too far, someone always snaps back. She studied him. His eyes carried knowledge, maybe warning. She wanted to ask who he was, who he spoke for, but before she could, he was gone. A ghost himself, disappearing into corridors she had thought she knew. For the first time, she wondered if even inside her own walls, she was still in control. Weeks later, it all came to a head. A mission went wrong, details never fully explained. A ghost team compromised, their cover blown. 2 killed in truth this time, 2 more barely extracted. The aftermath rippled through the program like a fractured line. For the first time, whispers of doubt seeped into the high halls. Sat with the survivors, their faces hollowed by grief and silence. They didn't ask why the mission had failed. They didn't ask what came next. They only asked her one thing. Why us? Had no answer. In that moment, she realized the truth she had been pushing away. The program wasn't just using shadows to fight. It was feeding on them, burning human lives to keep the world safe while leaving only emptiness behind. She rose from the table, heart heavy, and walked out into the night. The desert wind cut cold across her scars. She looked up at the stars, the same stars she had seen from the ravine when she was left for dead. Back then, being dead had freed her. Now, being dead was chaining others. And Dalton knew something had to change. How do you kill a shadow? The question lingered in every corner of his mind as the program began to fracture under its own weight. The mission still succeeded, targets fell, networks collapsed, civilians lived. But inside the ranks, ghosts were breaking. Rains disappeared one night. No mission orders, no briefing, just gone. A shadow swallowed by his own silence. Vega stopped speaking altogether. She trained harder than anyone, but her eyes had the hollow look of someone already buried. Saw it all, and each fracture felt like a mirror cracking inside her. One evening, Admiral Hart summoned her. The woman's face was drawn tight, but her voice carried the same steel it always had. "Dalton, the higher-ups are concerned. There's talk of shutting the program down." Didn't answer at first. She had thought about this moment, dreaded it, maybe even hoped for it. "Maybe that's for the best," she said finally. Hart's eyes sharpened. "You know what happens if they pull the plug. The networks out there don't stop. The enemy doesn't stop. This is the only thing that's worked." Worked? His voice cracked for the first time in years. "Look at them, look at what it's doing. Rains is gone, Vega's hanging by a thread, and me," she cut herself off. The words were too heavy to finish. Hart leaned forward. "Dalton, you started this. If you don't hold it together, it ends. And if it ends, thousands die. You carry that weight, you always have." Stared at her, the words hitting like bullets. She had carried it, alone, in the ravine, in the compound, in the desert, and now in the shadows of her own making. But the truth was brutal. She couldn't carry it anymore. That night she sat with Vega in the training yard. The younger woman's hands trembled as she cleaned her rifle, the motion endless, mechanical. Sat beside her in silence, then finally spoke. "You don't have to keep going." Vega's eyes flicked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're still alive. You still have a chance to stop before the silence swallows you." Tears welled in Vega's eyes, though she blinked them back fiercely. "And you, did you ever stop?" His throat tightened. "No, and that's why I know you should." For the first time, Vega let the rifle fall from her hands. She broke, shoulders shaking, breath ragged, and did something she hadn't done in years. She reached out, not as an instructor, not as a ghost, as a human. They sat there until dawn, two shadows clinging to what little light they could find. The next week brought the breaking point. Intelligence flagged a cell preparing coordinated strikes, schools, hospitals, crowded markets, a scale too large to ignore. The program's leaders wanted ghosts sent in. A full team. High risk, high cost. Stood in the briefing room, staring at the maps, the pins, the projected casualties. Silence pressed in as the others waited for her word. And for the first time, she said no. Her voice was steady, but the room stilled as if she'd fired a weapon. "I won't send them, not like this, not anymore." Arguments erupted, commanders shouted, analysts slammed papers. Hart's voice cut through. "Dalton, if you walk away from this, blood will be on your hands." Turned slowly, her eyes hard. "Blood is already on my hands, but I won't add theirs to it." The silence that followed was different this time. Not respect, not awe, something colder. She knew then that she couldn't stay. That night walked the corridors one last time. She passed the training grounds, the barracks, the halls where ghosts moved like shadows. She paused at the wall where their names had once been listed before being erased. She let herself look, and for the first time she whispered a goodbye. By dawn she was gone. No one knew where she went. Some said she disappeared into the mountains, back where it all began. Others believed she kept fighting alone, a ghost without leash or program. A few whispered she'd found a way to live quietly, somewhere far from the war, finally letting herself be human again. The truth only knew. But her legacy remained. The program changed, scaled back. Whispers of it still lingered, files locked in vaults, operatives who never returned to the world of the living. But her defiance left a mark, a reminder that shadows are not endless, that even ghosts have limits. And in the quiet corners of military history, in archives spoken of only in whispers, there was one sealed file. Inside it, a single line. Sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't the one you build, it's the one you let go. Dalton had been declared dead once, left in a ravine, forgotten by command. She had risen from that silence, destroyed networks, rewritten doctrine, birthed a program that changed warfare. But in the end, her greatest act wasn't killing generals or dismantling cells. It was choosing when to stop, choosing to reclaim the humanity the shadows had tried to strip away. And that choice became her quiet legend. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply walks away.